Good evening and welcome. It's great to see such a good crowd on this rainy and maybe snowy evening. Keep our fingers crossed, Alan. Yeah, I don't know. Are you crossing for snow or not? Okay. Okay. I want to welcome you to Glenview Community Church. Many of you have been here once or twice before, or every week for many years. At GCC, we say we're inspired by Christ, enriched by faith, committed to inclusivity, and we serve God as advocates for justice, compassion, and peace. And as part of the United Church of Christ, of course, no matter who you are or where you are in life's journey, absolutely. So again, welcome. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Amos Speakers Forum at GCC. And I see that Rosalie, would you stand up, Rosalie? Rosalie's late husband, Tom, is the inspiration for this Speakers Forum.
And I want to thank you again. For honoring him. Very much appreciated. And just a lovely look. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of other housekeeping notes. I want to thank several people who have been instrumental in getting this good turnout tonight. First of all, Debbie Fosdick. Thank you, Debbie, for providing us with our speaker and introducing me to David. And we really appreciate that. To Dave Aki, who is our tech guru tonight and going to keep us on the straight and narrow. To Tanya McCarthy, Laura Heiser, Meredith Estes, and others who have been very helpful in the pre-program publicity. Our next program, I'm happy to announce, because I just got him to agree, is going to be a visit with Reverend Jim Matarazzo. It's going to be on Tuesday, February. No, that's wrong. Wednesday. Not Tuesday. Wednesday. Sorry about that. Wednesday, February 22nd. Ash Wednesday. Church at 7. Speakers Forum at 8. So come for the imposition of ashes, stay for the Speakers Forum. And by then, I'm sure Jim will have come up with a scintillating topic. And if he doesn't, we can just pepper him with all kinds of questions. Great. I also want to call to your attention that on Sunday, March 12th at 3 p.m. is our annual Concert for Peace. Catherine, did you want to say something about it?
Oh, this will be the 9th of this week. It's looking like it's going to be a great program, and we will have both a concert exhibit.
Great. So these are always wonderful concerts and well attended. So get there early. Sunday, March 12th at 3 o'clock. And the offering, which will be taken, will be to benefit Hands of Peace. Okay. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker of the evening, David Ullric, to talk about saving planet Earth. What can we do to confront climate change? Very briefly, Dave was actively engaged during a 44-year career in environmental problem solving across the Midwest and internationally as executive director of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. In that role, he advised both the cities along the Great Lakes and other cities along the St. Lawrence River about both economic issues as well as environmental issues, and developed a great reputation for the things he was able to accomplish there. He also worked prior to that for a number of years for Valdez Adamkus in the Chicago office of the Regional Environmental Protection Agency here. And that was before Mr. Adamkus went back to Europe and became president of his country. I've forgotten what country. Lithuania. So he went from the EPA to being president of Lithuania, which is pretty amazing.
As well.
Well, but you're still on the way up, so. And I think I'll stop right there and say we are excited to have David here to be our speaker tonight, and he's gonna tell us how we can hopefully solve the problem of global warming. And I expect everybody here to take the bit and be involved in that very thing. So come on up, David.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And first of all, thank you all for showing up and coming out on a miserable evening like this. I'm always astounded that anyone would come to listen to me talk. So I hope I don't disappoint you. And now that Tom has mentioned Valdez Adamkus, I could never stop calling him Mr. Adamkus or President Adamkus. I did visit with him 3 years ago in Vilnius, Lithuania, where he is now. But he had a very distinguished career at EPA and was involved in the Lithuanian independence movement and was really instrumental in helping bring down the Soviet Empire. And he is at 96, still very much alive, and consulted with frequently on political matters. And in Lithuania, and with the situation with the Ukraine, it's obvious that there's a lot of concern in Eastern Europe, the Baltic states in particular, with Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. But he was a wonderful mentor and tremendous leader. And in all of the briefing sessions we would have, at the end of the briefing session, I was his deputy for the last 10 years, he would say, "Well, David, what is the right thing to do for the environment?" And that was what really guided us all the time. Tom and I had a little back and forth about how he was going to identify me, and we wound up with he was going to, and I'm glad you didn't use it, calling me distinguished. And I never view myself as that, but there was a little event with Mr. Adamkus when he was introducing a friend in at a Senate hearing, although it was a field hearing in Cleveland. And one of my good friends, who's actually an immigration judge now, Sebastian Patty is his name, and Mr. Adamkus was introducing him and said, "Well, I would like to introduce my extinguished colleague." So I felt I was more an extinguished colleague than I was a distinguished colleague. Yeah. So by the end of the evening, we're going to have at least a much better idea on how to save the planet. And I'm going to drag you through a little bit more than just focusing on climate change, because we didn't get to where we are overnight. There's been a lot that's been happening, at least in the 50 years that I've been involved in environmental problem solving. And I'm afraid it's not going to happen overnight. There are no simple formulas or silver bullets to solve the environmental problems, and particularly climate change. it's going to take a lot of hard work from all of us at the individual level, at the community level, at the state level, at the federal level, and very importantly with this issue, the international level. And one of the reasons I got involved in environmental matters is that way back in the early 1970s, late 60s, it struck me that, and those were just more the conventional air, water pollution problems, that they were transboundary, and it was going to really require international cooperation. Now more than ever, we really, really do need that. Now, a lot of the thinking that forms the basis for what we are doing now started much earlier, and the language was much different at the time. We heard a lot about conservation and natural resource management, and that was kind of the origin of this thinking. Now, I think we might have done better had we listened to the indigenous people a little bit more about that and living sustainably, but we didn't. We did a lot of other things with them. This evolved much more towards environmental protection. Hear a lot about sustainability now, and then a subset of that really being climate change. So I'm going to try to bring us through that evolution of this thinking about how we can be better and do better to God's creation, this planet Earth that we are so blessed to have, and see whether or not we can do a better job in the future than we have in the past. I think we're going to have to count on our children and children's children and great-grandchildren as well to really finish the job. But it never will be done, I'm afraid. So conservation and natural resource management is really how a lot of this thinking began. And as I mentioned before, indigenous people seem to have a much better sense of, how many buffalo can you kill and still be able to have more in the next year, and the wildlife and how you treat the forest and things like that. But unfortunately, we did not really listen to and learn from the indigenous people. Interesting, one of the real wonderful thinkers about this issue, and the book's name is Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if any of you familiar with that at all. Robin Kimmerer. I highly recommend that book. She's a PhD biologist, I think, ecologist, who has really brought traditional knowledge and modern science together to have a better understanding of the planet and what we can do to protect it. Some of the earlier writers, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, started to put thoughts about this in writing to expand our awareness of the importance of the natural world. We hear a lot about Teddy Roosevelt, and he was an early thinker and along these lines. I think he killed too many big animals along the way, but not everybody is perfect, and he wasn't either. I do recommend the biographies of Teddy Roosevelt. They really are quite interesting. And then from my old home state, I'm a cheesehead, as well as a couple of other people here. Aldo Leopold was one of the first real sophisticated thinkers about the science of ecology. Too much, and it still happens today, we break down things into silos. And he was one of the first people who really understood how everything relates to everything else. And you can't segment one thing from another and think you can solve one thing without thinking about the collateral effects in other areas. Interesting note on him, his famous book is a Sand County Almanac. And the introduction to that book, he wrote a little letter of introduction, and he dated it March 4th, 1948, which was the day I was born. So I don't know if my mom, had something going with Aldo Leopold or whatever it was, but I thought that I was kind of destined. The other thing, March 4th, 1835, I think, or 37 is when Chicago was founded. So I was destined to wind up in Chicago as well. Then Rachel Carson was another big thinker. And when I spend a lot of time mentoring younger people about getting involved, and I really encourage them to read some of these seminal books to get a feeling, because back then a lot of people weren't thinking about these things. And her book, Silent Spring, really was an awakening in terms of what the pesticides in particular and chemical fertilizers were doing to the bird populations. She's got another book that doesn't get as much attention, but I think is almost even better. It's called The Sea Around Us. And although we've got the inland freshwater seas here in the Great Lakes, she talks a lot about globally in the seas around us, if you will. So I recommend that as well. So that was some of the early foundation for what we did. And when people like your own Debbie Fosdick and Kathy, then Bjork, now Marquis, and I were all tromping around Madison, mostly staying out of trouble, but getting in trouble every once in a while. It was a lot of the focus was on the war and civil rights, but environment was a big issue at that time. That was when the real awakening began. And the Earth Day that occurred on April 22nd of 1970 was really a launching pad. Prior to that time, it was pretty much in the hands of state and local government to deal with environmentally related problems. And most of that was local health departments, and there was a real public health focus to it. And I guess it was primarily our good friend, the Cuyahoga River. And I guess this was November of 1969 when it caught fire. The thing is it had caught fire many times before, and I think after that, as did the Chicago River, the Detroit River, and the Buffalo River as well. But it was actually this picture in Time magazine in December of 1969. I was majoring in English and about ready to go into a career in teaching. And I saw that picture, and I had spent a lot of time on the lakes of northern Wisconsin. And I looked at that and I said, this has got to stop. So it was too late to become a scientist. So I decided to go back to Wisconsin and go to law school. And I'm still a recovering lawyer now, but did a lot of work back then on the legal side. And the federal laws that were passed in the 1970s really resulted in a dramatic change in cultural change in our country, and in terms of the relationship between government and corporations and cities in terms of what they were putting into the water and into the air and onto the land. So I had the good fortune of being on the ground floor when all of that got started, and it was a very exciting time. And in fact, the amount of progress that was made in the 1970s was really quite dramatic. The thing is that we kind of had to stop the bleeding at that point, if you will, and let's just not continue to make it worse than it is already. And it wasn't until the 80s that we started to go back and try to undo a lot of the damage that had been done before. And that's what the Superfund law was all about. It gave the federal government and eventually state governments as well tremendous authority to deal with that. One of the things that I really wasn't aware of at all when I went to work with the federal government was the dynamic that existed between federal, state, local, and tribal governments. And for far too long, tribal governments and their treaty rights were ignored. And a lot of the treaty rights involved not so directly the environmental protection side, but the rights to hunting and gathering, which were affected dramatically by environmental quality. So in the 80s, the tribal governments started to get much more involved. And I don't know, I was naive and went into this thinking, hey, we're all on the same side. We're trying to protect the environment. Can't we all just get together and be friendly like good girls and boys? Well, it doesn't quite work that way. And as Tom mentioned, I spent my last 14 years when I got paid to do this work. I don't get paid anymore, but that's okay. But for the last 14 years, I worked with local governments. And mayors bring a real interesting perspective, and they're much more hands-on, have to face their constituents on a daily basis. And, you know, for beginner, they got to get the snow plowed and the garbage picked up, and then, you know, deal with a lot of other things as well. So that dynamic was very interesting. Obviously, the private sector has been a major factor in all of this. And it's tremendously interesting to see the different cultures in the different corporate world, and progressively. And I think that the very strong regulatory program of the 1970s was necessary to bring about the cultural change that really needed to happen. And a lot of companies got it, and they got with the program and did tremendous things. Others just fought it, you know, till the bitter end. I wasn't going to name any names, but Dow Chemical and U.S. Steel Gary Works were two that I tangled with, and they fought it tooth and nail, you know, almost to the end. And you know, finally they came around as well. So the private sector is very important. And I really do think, and I had the good fortune of 14 years in the nonprofit sector, I believe that, and with the organizations that many of you are involved in, that there's a real future in that. There are limitations as to what the governments can do and what the private sector can do. There's a lot more flexibility with nonprofit organizations in terms of what they don't have the formal legal authority. But I like to think that a lot of the groups have moral authority and can really bring about positive change. As I alluded to before, we really are all in this together. We only have one planet Earth. And if we cannot do a better job internationally and cooperatively, we're just not going to make it. I did have the good fortune of being in Paris in 2015 with a group of mayors that former Mayor Bloomberg and Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, called the mayors together, even though we were not formal members of the international negotiations of the Paris Accords, that laid some real good groundwork for climate change in the future, for dealing with climate change in the future. But it was very clear to me there that working with other countries, and there was quite a large indigenous representation there as well. You know, again, it's been very slow progress, but gradually we are making some progress. So that was the kind of more formal environmental protection side of things. And over the last 5 to 10 years, we've heard a lot more about sustainability and doing a better job of looking at how environmental issues relate to social issues and relate to economic issues as well. I think many of you have heard about environmental justice and the concerns about how underserved communities are disproportionately affected by environmental pollution. Altgeld Gardens, the south side of Chicago, where Barack Obama did some of his first community organizing, tremendous PCB contamination, and you know, the big hazardous waste and solid waste landfills right across the way. That's just a microcosm of the macrocosm that is occurring in many places around the country. So recognizing this interrelationship is important. One of the frustrations I've had with talking about sustainability is whenever I start pushing the issue, and I'm on a college board of directors and board of trustees in northern Wisconsin now, Northland College, and I say, well, we've got to focus more on sustainability. Well, what do you mean by sustainability? Everybody defines it differently. So I said, well, let's try to agree upon something. And I always stick with a relatively simple one, and that is the use and enjoyment of resources today in a way that does not compromise the use and enjoyment of future generations. I'm sure it's far from perfect, but, it is at least a working definition. Normally don't drink bottled water, but that's okay, Dave. Yeah, we've got all this good water around here, but, there are a lot of examples about unsustainable use. All you have to do is look out west a little bit at the reservoirs now. Sure enough, 41 inches of rain in the Bay Area over the since October. Maybe some of the reservoirs will be filled up, but long-term, Las Vegas, Arizona, a lot of places in Southern California, it is not sustainable. The global financial crisis, I think, is another example. I don't know how many of you have seen the Netflix movie Margin Call, and it focused on the global financial crisis at that time. And I don't know, just a small portion of that was the bundling of mortgages. And you think if you bring a whole bunch of mortgages together somehow or another, magically, they'll all be high grade and, reliable. Well, that turned into be a house of cards. The other thing that I don't think is really sustainable is the kind of income gap that exists in this country and globally as well, which I understand got even worse over the last 1 or 2 years. So there are too many examples of unsustainability out there. And I think that part of the problem is too much we look at very much the short term, and quarterly profits. It's almost unbelievable how the stock market just waits for the quarterly reports to come out, and I just don't know how long we can try to focus on that kind of thing and think that we're going to be good for the long haul. So I really do think that to be sustainable, we've got to do a better job of that. So finally, I'm going to get to the topic that I'm supposed to be talking about, and that's climate change. But this is all important background. So what I would like to do is get a little audience participation at this point. And, I've got a couple of things that I'm doing and I've got in mind about climate change, but I want to ask any of you out there about what you might be doing to address climate change. Debbie, I'm sure you would like to start out this and
Recycling.
okay, good.
Taking my own bags to the grocery store.
Good.
I have a brother who does way more than I do. So
Okay, Scott.
between the two of us, our carbon footprint is quite good.
Oh, good. Is it getting smaller?
Well, I bought a plug-in hybrid a month ago.
Very good.
And I was shocked that when I called dealerships around here in Wisconsin, a lot of them said either they never get any plug-in cars, or they said we get one a year. And I wonder, I never figured out why they get one. Maybe just so they could put it out for show.
But you got it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got on the list and they called me when they came in and paid about the price to get it. And that's kind of, one person doing that isn't gonna solve things. I found it. I gotta find a place to plug it in.
Yeah, that is a problem. But yeah,
I've been driving a Prius for 16 years.
wonderful.
I have to say, the first time I parked in our church parking lot, because I had this revelation that I needed to do this, I expected to see Priuses all over the parking lot.
And you didn't.
Still own the own. What car, and if it would plug in, it would be better.
Yeah. Well, those are some of anybody gone solar on their roof yet? Not yet. Look at it seriously. I did last fall. And, it hasn't knocked the socks off my utility bill yet, and particularly over the last couple of months. And I'm in the city, and I've got an east-west exposure and two buildings that are a little taller than me. But they said that it would be 98% of my electrical needs over the course of the year. So I'm counting on the summer to, get the metering up. Deb.
I'm loath to ask this question, but I have friends who have gone either pescatarian or vegetarian, or in some cases even vegan. And for many of them, it's not just a matter of animal rights, but they believe that it's better for the environment. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely, no question about it. No, the grain-fed animals are both in terms of the methane that they generate and the amount of land that they take and the amount of energy that goes into getting a unit of protein versus what you can get out of rice and beans, for example. It's huge. I don't have any quantifying numbers related to it, but our diet is a really, really important thing. Well, for starters, one needs to recognize that there is a problem. And Oscar and I were talking about whether or not the Chinese had called COVID a hoax. No, it was really climate change, and our former president referred to that as a hoax, and you hear it in many places today. But it doesn't take much to see that this is a real clear and present danger to us that we've got to deal with now. And it's so fascinating how the language changes so quickly. How many people had heard about atmospheric rivers until now? Or bomb cyclones? I mean, that was the winter. And this is like dramatically different. I've got I only found this morning, so it's not on my slides. But this, and I'll pass this around so you can look at it. And if it doesn't make it back, it's okay. But this is ice cover on the Great Lakes. And, this was the greatest year, which was 1977. And I think, well, this was 2013. This is where we are as of, I don't know, a couple of days ago. The ice cover, that there's almost no ice covering the Great Lakes right now. And the interesting thing about that, if you lived in Buffalo and were there whenever it was December 22nd, 3rd, 4th, and they got 8 feet of snow. With Lake Erie staying open that long and the winds coming the whole length of that, it's not as bad in Michigan with Lake Michigan, which is only 90 miles wide. They got a foot of snow. They got 8 feet out there. And, I was on a conference call this afternoon, and a guy from the Bay Area said they've had 41 inches of rain in the Bay Area since October. It is absolutely phenomenal. So, my friends, there is a real serious problem. Just a couple of the things that I think I would suggest that we look at. So electric vehicles, I got a plug-in hybrid as well in October. It only gets about 30 per gallon, but I can go 30 miles on all electric. And that takes care of pretty much most things I do in the city. And I got out here, and I think I'll get home just on electric tonight without plugging in the lot. Solar panels are another thing. And I was really surprised at number one, what they would guarantee. We'll see if they support it. And it was $10,000. I was expecting it would be a lot more. But I think there is tremendous potential with that. Reusable bags to the store. We're all trying to do that now. Riding a bike, but be careful and always wear a helmet, and walk as much as possible. this one is a tough one in terms of air transport. I think we all probably still fly a certain amount. And, that is one of the large, although the ground transportation is contributing more carbon than air transport. But on a per passenger mile, the air transport really does a lot. We're very fortunate in the Chicago area to have the public transit that we do, both CTA in the city and Metra that comes out here. Just a block or so from your house, Debbie, and you can get around. And Amtrak is, very available and very accessible. So those types of things are available. And once you start doing it, convince your relatives and friends. But I really think there's a lot to be said for, as soon as I put the solar panels on my house, and actually I was the second on the block because the guy 3 doors over has a Tesla with solar panels, that he's got a battery that he charges with his solar panels, and he charges his car from that. And, he's just 3 doors down. He's kind of a techie guy. So he gets out how all of this stuff works. But that was one of the things that led me to do it. I'm a little less excited about Teslas now with what Mr. Musk is up to these days, but I think it's still a pretty good car. Obviously, being politically active and supporting candidates who really get it and want to do something about it can make a difference. And, getting them elected and then keeping on them to make sure that they live up to their campaign promises. Yes.
So question about solar.
Yeah.
For those of us that are in townhomes, so can't just throw solar panels
Yeah.
on. I hear sometimes about solar farms, like are there, emerging options to buy solar energy if we don't?
Well, I think in Illinois, we are able to, we've got a choice of where the electricity comes. I've never figured out exactly how it works. I did that before I got my solar panels, but then I found out that the company that, I was working with, didn't, they were into renewable energy, but somehow or another, I couldn't get a net metering agreement with them. And I had to go back to Commonwealth Edison. So, yes, I think that there are some options out there. Yes.
Just
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, all the community solar farms in the state are fully subscribed.
Ah, okay.
When CEJA was passed, the recent law Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was passed in 2021. Additional solar farms were authorized. There are more than eight companies currently approved by the Illinois Power Agency, but there are a number of farms that are been applied to the Illinois. A number of firms are developing additional farms, and they have applied to the Illinois Power Agency. Those applications will be decided in March, but it'll be at least another year before additional community solar farms will be built.
Okay. You got a point.
I was just gonna say that we joined one of these community solar farms about 1.5 years ago. For a farm that was then constructed near Rockford. So don't have panels on the roof, but supposedly we're getting power.
I don't know how many of you have flown into O'Hare or Midway recently, but particularly O'Hare, one of the things that struck me is there are all of these, I think they look like 1-story warehouses and small manufacturing. And there wasn't a single solar panel on any of those roofs, and there are just acres and acres and acres of them. There's really a debate developing now because some of these solar farms are being put out in rural areas, And sometimes, agricultural land and forest land is being compromised as a result of that. And there is some real pushback on that, in addition to the wind farms and the turbines. So, we're gonna, and there's been a big battle over putting turbines in the Great Lakes. I think the first ones are scheduled to go in near Cleveland. I don't know how widespread that's going to become, but it's quite controversial. And this is one of those where I'm afraid we aren't going to be able to have our cake and eat it too, or something like that, whatever the metaphor is, that's right. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. Well, in the spirit of wrapping it up, one thing I've learned in 50 years is that we're better at creating new problems than solving existing problems. And as I mentor younger people who are interested in environmental protection, sustainability, and climate change, I say, don't worry, it won't be solved during your lifetime. And just keep working on it. It's job security. So it is out there for the long haul. We've got to get a lot better at the prevention side of things. And it just is much, much more effective and less expensive just not to create the problem in the first place. And unfortunately, we're so far down the road on so many problems that we can't go back. But as we are developing new things, we've got to think ahead in prevention. And just, I've kind of boiled my life down to two things: relationships with people and making the world a better place. And so I recommend keeping life simple. Yes.
I am an avid recycler, but I find the process extremely frustrating because the rules are inconsistent. In my area, I can recycle plastic 1 through 5, but then I have all this stuff that comes through that is 6 or unlabeled or whatever it is. Do you foresee any time in the future? I think it's impossible because it'll cut to the bottom line. But it would seem to me that if governments mandated, got together, made consistent guidelines that would make all the difference in the world in terms of what we could actually get recycled versus the stuff we think we're recycling and that then gets thrown out. Because we can't do it. 6s aren't allowed. Well, what do you do with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm equally frustrated. I don't know how you're doing in Glenview, but we're under 5% of the waste stream is getting recycled in Chicago. And that's a big part of it. Yes.
We had a lecture committee association about recycling in Glenview. And you don't even realize, like, black plastic cannot be recycled, and not because in general it can't, but they don't have the equipment that can handle it. And the recycling centers here. So things that even, Mary, that you think are good, aren't good. They can't be, they've just taken out and thrown away.
Wow. Yes.
I think that it's still going on, that China used to buy our plastics for recycling and they stopped doing that. And so the real solution is not better recycling. Well, we need better recycling, but it's just to stop using so much plastic, and you can now pay a small fortune for a silicone baggie and, wash it and reuse it. And, I have an embarrassingly stuffed cabinet with plastic containers that I reuse. And I don't buy Tupperware or anything like that anymore. I just use all this junk.
Now, I had a friend tell me that, who's very committed environmentalist, but she said she just was not going to wash out plastic bags anymore. She just couldn't do that. Yes.
So a related question about reusable bags. I'm all for it. And our son from Berkeley, California is all for it. My wife is, anyway, everybody's for it. But when I go to the grocery store, I ask for paper because I want to be able to put our garbage in that.
Yeah.
And not bag it in plastic. So is there a middle ground?
Well, I think, yeah, ideally you bring a bag and continue to reuse it all the time, but certainly paper is infinitely better. than the plastic, I think at least. And, it does biodegrade and decompose. And if you use it for other things, I mean, I forget to bring my bags there every once in a while, and I absolutely refuse to get a plastic bag. And often I'll leave with my pocket stuffed with things. But I get a receipt to make sure people don't think I was shoplifting. Yes.
I may have an unpopular premise, so just first I ask you to see if you agree with this, and like I buy carbon credits when I fly,
Mhm.
I recycle, do all this kind of stuff, but I'm extremely pessimistic on moral suasion solving the problem. I think it has to be reflected to the bottom line eventually, whether it be your personal bottom line, your corporate bottom line, the government. And to that end, so first part, two-part question. Do you think I'm right? Maybe I'm a down with people kind of guy and I'm wrong. We can all get there by love and peace. I am in a church, but
Well, I don't think, if I can address that, I don't think it's an either or.
true.
And I don't think it's going to be all moral suasion. I put solar panels on. I didn't crunch the numbers.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to be a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year payoff. I'm a bleeding heart tree hugger type of guy, and I'll do it. And I can afford to do that. So there are some goofballs like me who will do that. But and this is a very interesting thing. I don't know how many of you, I certainly hope you haven't spent a lot of time with the Inflation Reduction Act, but there is $368 billion worth of incentives that are going to be taking, and it's for batteries, it's for, airline fuel, it's for every possible thing, and, for buying cars and rebates on cars and things like that. So there is a recognition that it's going to take, bottom line financial types incentives. And, we've been, giving subsidies to the oil industry and the timber industry forever. So why not have subsidies for these types of things as well? So that's going to happen. It's going to be a big battle in between the House and the Senate in appropriations this year. But I think it's going to be a combination. Some people will do it because it's the right thing. Other people will wait for a financial incentive to do it.
And to that point, given divided government, the opposition, by the way, to renewable energy in the countryside is funded by, whatever, big oil. And so there's a lot, a lot of these grassroots.
Yep.
Divided government, very strict literalistic court rulings. You're a lawyer, you know more about that than me. And a deglobalization going where we can do everything perfectly, but if China keeps building coal plants, it's all over. So, I mean, it looks kind of dim to me on the governmental front. Am I wrong? Please tell me I am.
Well, you're not totally wrong, or you're totally right. And this is one thing where I want to keep coming back to the nonprofit sector. I do think that they have been able to really be a significant presence. I'll use my organization as an example. The one I worked for 14 years, Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. And when I left EPA and went to the organization, Mayor Daley started it, and he dragged me into the office and said, okay, I want you to do 3 things. I want you to get a seat at Great Lakes and St. Lawrence decision-making tables for cities, because I think cities have good ideas. Secondly, I want a best practices network. And thirdly, I want Washington and Ottawa to pay more attention to the Great Lakes. He says, you figure out how to do it, or I'll find somebody else. Well, I kind of figured out how to do it. But in any event, there was a lot of really, and it was almost competition among cities as to who could conserve the most water. When the big microplastics concern came up on the Great Lakes, and it's still out there, but totally outside of the regulatory process, we wrote a letter to the 9 largest companies who manufactured what are they called where you rub your skin? Exfoliant. Yeah. Yeah, I thinking of Vietnam and defoliants, no, exfoliant. And basically, we kind of put them on the spot and we said, this is a problem. We think you're part of the problem. What are you going to do about it? 6 of the 9 came back within a month or 2 months and said, we know this is a problem. They didn't like the bad publicity. So, yeah, it's not going to be just government. It's not going to be just private sector. It's not going to be just nonprofits. And I still think that what each one of us do individually does make a difference. You know, the neighbors on either side of you will notice. And, you know, let's hope this is the new keep up with the Joneses, you know. Oh, they've got a cool plug-in hybrid. Yes, Tom, you gonna cut me off now or?
A few weeks ago, we saw these news stories about the great scientific happening where nuclear fusion was going to be the wave of the future, and that at some point in future is going to do away with the carbon footprint altogether. Could you comment on whether that's realistic, and if so, when might it happen, and will it be too late?
Okay, so I'm an English major lawyer, and I don't know, are there any nuclear physicists in the
English major though, but.
as I said at the very beginning, there are no silver bullets, and fusion, I do not think is a silver bullet. I know a lot of my heart bleeding, tree hugging friends would die if they heard me say this, but nuclear power, I don't think we ought to be building new ones. I think we ought to do a better job of operating ones, and we still have to figure out a place to dispose of the high level radioactive waste, and neither we nor Canada have figured that out yet. But it is a, you know, zero carbon emission alternative, and in Illinois, you know, we've got a lot of it. So yes, sir.
Isn't Bill Gates funding something that has real promise in that area?
I don't know how much promise there is, but I think he's a pretty smart guy. And yes, he is. And you know, a lot of people they're just, you know, dead set against,
Oh, yeah.
you know, any kind of, you know, radioactive energy generation. Yeah.
I was talking about this, but there was a lady in my office when I worked downtown who was an English major. And she was the head of the anti-nuke coalition in Chicago.
Yeah.
And the problem is, to me, for my whole life in business, doesn't have any credibility. And she didn't have credibility then. I mean, the problem is we've got the yin and the yang of people on the left and people on the right, and they just keep throwing hand grenades at each other. And empirically, though, she just didn't have the background to criticize the way she was on television all the time, and she just didn't have the weight, you know, technologically, I'm talking, for me to listen to it. So I'm paying attention to, you know, what business can do to make this work. You know, Goldman Sachs never gives anything away, but there's an article in Forbes right now about Goldman Sachs funding a initiative in California for funding of these projects that we were talking about. And I have more faith in business to do this than politicians, personally. And I think there's a lot of people like me.
Well, I think there is a lot of good, positive leadership in business. There are some politicians, I think, who do get it. I'm afraid that the level of civil discourse has deteriorated so dramatically, particularly over the last 5 years. I won't point fingers in any direction, but this is a very serious threat, not only economically and environmentally and socially, but you know, to democratic societies, that if we cannot, and it's interesting, you know, I grew up in a private sector family. My dad had a lot of business clients, and I think he was ready to roll over anticipating as grave when I went to work for the federal government. But I really, one of the reasons I did go is number one, it was the only place I got a job offer, but it wound up being a good job. But number two, I really felt that government is only as good as the people who are in it. As the same with business and nonprofits and churches and other places. It all boils down to people. And I was able, I think, and you could talk with a lot of the corporate people who I dealt with, that I had a good, positive working relationship with them. And it wasn't the good guys, bad guys. It was, how are we going to solve this problem? And if people were willing to come to the table in that spirit, fine, I'll talk with them. If not, I'll take them to court. Oscar.
Isn't it, however, that, and I'm from a business background as well, and a lawyer. Isn't it that businesses are driven by profits and they may be perfectly good willing, try to do the best thing, but they need to make a profit?
Well, that is an issue, but the whole ESG, environmental, social governance movement, if you will. And what's the big firm that BlackRock, basically, and I think it's the largest investment conglomerate in the world, basically says that they will look at that. Now, there are 18 states that have filed suit or have created laws that says, we are not going to invest our pension funds and things in companies that, advocate ESG. So yes, Oscar, at the end of the day, a corporation does have to generate a profit and dividends and, increase the value of the stock. But I think the thinking is advancing more and more all the time that in fact, the companies that are higher performers in environment, social, and governance issues are in fact doing better. So
I mean, my point is not that, my point is that you need regulation and that will modify corporate behavior. Without the regulations, they're driven by profit.
well, the interesting thing, I spent 30 intensive years in a regulatory command and control environment. I think we kind of reached a point of diminishing returns. And I honestly think that a lot of the financial incentives are the kinds of things that may in fact drive behavior more in the future. Only time will tell on that. Yes.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Behavior is driven by the framework. We're not changing the framework. If I'm a public utility, why on earth would I build a wind farm? There's no incentive for that. If I want to build a gas plant, I go to the rate writer and I don't even care how much the gas plant costs. I say it's going to cost me $100 million, so your rate's going to go up by X. No discussion. If I'm a community, a solar farm, now I have to get private financing. I have to make this work economically. I'm at a disadvantage compared to utility. It's just the way the framework is set up. Because they don't have to care how much the energy costs because they just pay it out, just pass it on to us.
Well, that is a clear factor. At the same time, I'm seeing it, flying, which I try to do less frequently now, but from the West Coast to the Midwest, you do see quite a few wind farms.
Not run by public utilities. They're run by IPPs, independent power producers.
Yeah.
Or in states where there is a regulation, you have to, for utilities, we have to, let's say, get 10% out of renewables. But even there, a lot of times the utilities will buy RECs. We're talking about the renewable energy certificates. So they'll buy that from somebody else, but they don't put it. So.
Okay. Well, maybe we need a law change and.
Well, it's not so much, it's changing the framework on how things are done. It's not catching up.
As a congregation, we are with the program. This past Sunday, instead of immersion, we got watermarks on our program.
Ah. Very good. Very good.
That's a hard comment to follow.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, in the state houses, news I read the days that Ohio is, Governor DeWine of Ohio has signed legislation that declares natural gas as green energy. And it's legislation, it's a template promulgated by the American Legislative Council, ALEC. And so it's likely to sprout up in all sorts of other states now. And the defense is, well, relative to coal,
Oh,
natural
yeah.
gas is, produces fewer emissions. So buckle up.
Yeah, well, yeah, it
So
is
now
gonna
it's-
be,
It's the,
it's gonna be a real battle.
it's Orwellian kind of, so the natural gas is clean.
Yeah, well, I just came back from Wyoming and in the state legislature, a resolution has been introduced to ban the sale of electric vehicles as of 2035
In Wyoming.
in Wyoming, yeah, so,
Well, David,
yeah, Kathy.
It's a conundrum, because you have a conundrum, you have a group of people who are looking at alternatives and developing alternatives in science work. And then you have people who are looking at the flaws of everything that comes up that could be environmentally better for us to use. So you just name it, the wind farms, are you gonna have like somebody standing up and getting 10 points, why actually that's creating more pollution and more environmental damage, or you're plugging cars, oh, well, there's 10 reasons why the battery costs and the battery materials that are used, the rare materials that are used. So we're always being buffeted, and so we can't rise above it. And then to the gentleman's point in the back there, then, you're told like these products on your grocery store shelf have hazardous types of things, or, certain kinds of toxins. Well, they're on your grocery store shelf. I mean, take them off the shelf. Someone should be in charge of removing those things from the shelf. You don't want me to use plastic wrap anymore? Okay, like, take off, get rid of it, give me something else. But it's always there.
Yeah.
And there's always people that are gonna just kill, every new idea. Because there are probably flaws in some of these things, right? They're not perfect.
No, none of them are.
I mean, they're kind of alternatives in a way, but we hope that they're better.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of this
Sensibly better, but who knows?
does come down to individual choices. And, if we're in a position to do it, then getting a more fuel efficient car, or a hybrid plug-in, or a fully electric, as the old one phases out. And the battery issue, I know a lot of the pushback I was hearing was that, what's going to happen to all of these lithium batteries when they wear out? Well, apparently the private sector, the market, has already stepped in and is effectively recycling these batteries. I have no idea exactly how they do it, but the biggest problem is that there isn't enough feedstock of old worn out batteries to make it profitable, yet they need a larger volume of them. Now that's going to change relatively quickly. I know getting around in Chicago now, the number of Teslas in the city is pretty phenomenal. There are really a lot of them. And then there are a number of other plug-in hybrids, and hats off to you for your Prius at 16 years old. Oh, sorry. Great. Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, okay. Get your Hyundai or your Volt, Chevy Volt. What is?
Porsche.
Oh, okay. That's a little out of my league. Oscar. Well, Tom, I didn't see anybody fall asleep, so did we do okay?
This has been great.
Thank you.